Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Ken Schachter. I'm here with my co-host, Bernie Furshpan. On today's episode of Disrupting Hate on hmTv, my special guest, National Urban League President and CEO, Marc Morial, will join us for a conversation about tariffs and the age of normalized hate speech. Before taking the helm at the civil rights advocacy group, Marc Morial served as mayor of New Orleans from 1994 to 2002. Marc, let's start with this. The National Urban League's 2024 Equality Index of Black America stands at 75.7%. Can you take us through the index and its meaning?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. The Equality Index is the very best and the only true statistical index that measures the social and economic status of white Americans in comparison to Black Americans. And we also have a Hispanic index. But let me talk about the Black-White Index. The idea is to examine the status of Blacks versus whites in America when it comes to social and economic factors. Joblessness, home ownership, wealth and income, death rates due to various diseases. When we look at all of those numbers together, African Americans are at about 75% of the status of where white Americans are. Now, that does not suggest that where white Americans are is optimal or perfect. It's just a comparative index. And the reason it's so important is because discussions around race and racial justice in America are often informed by people's opinions, their stereotypes, and all too often by misinformation. This index is about the facts, it's about the truth, it's about the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And so we think it's important. Now, the only other thing I would add, these numbers, comparative numbers, have not changed dramatically in 20 years. Changed somewhat, but dramatically no in 20 years. And so it is the caboose syndrome. African Americans are like the caboose. When the train moves faster, the normative status of Blacks may improve slightly, but they remain at the back of the train.
What are some of the components of the index? I believe economics is one of the largest pieces.
So it's economics, education, health, social justice, and civic engagement. And let's talk about the education index. We look at high school graduation rates. We look at college matriculation rates. We look at third and eighth grade test scores. We look at levels of early childhood education, to name some of the factors that we measure, because education is central to America. An educated workforce, a better educated workforce, has driven social progress and economic progress in the country. And it's so dramatic when we look at the 20th century, how when we had a better educated America, more people finishing high school and certainly more people going and completing college, the economic status, the GDP, the growth in America just accelerated.
Marc, it's a pleasure to meet you. This is Bernie Furshpan here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. This is a new podcast platform for the last couple of months, and it's a privilege to have you with us. I'm grateful that you were able to join us and share with us this very valuable information and enlighten us about this index that I find fascinating. I think it's wonderful that you're working on this. And my question to you is, over the past few years, or maybe a couple of decades, which one of these would you say, which one of these factors have you seen improve or increase at a higher rate, at a higher speed?
It's a great question. We saw the health index improve pre-COVID, particularly after the passage of the Affordable Care Act, because access to health insurance is an important differentiator when it comes to health care in America. The deaths, the diseases. In fact, we saw a period during COVID when where the life expectancy rate for whites and blacks almost simultaneously. But blacks' rate was lower than whites' rate. Economics index has not dramatically changed, really, in 60 to 70 years. That economics index is stubborn, and it's a comparative index. So, for example, historic, the black unemployment rate is about twice that of the white rate. We saw a little bit of a deviation in that in the Biden years when it came down to 1.6, 1.7. But that's a perfect example of how even when the unemployment is still twice as high as the white rate. So the economic numbers, the economics index has been stubborn, it's been persistent, and it's been difficult to move. But we saw some movement in the health index, like in the, if you will, education index, mainly because of higher high school graduation rates.
So, hypothetically, if there were a couple of policies that you could put in place, if you were sitting in the Oval Office, for example, what might they be that could change things?
Would be a living wage for every American, because a rising tide at the bottom lifts all boats. And so one of the challenges we have in America, particularly acute in Black America, is poverty among people who work. Let me emphasize that. People who work every day, a job or two jobs, still cannot make ends meet. Making work pay with a wage rate is fundamental. Number two, we need to move to a situation where every American has access to affordable health care. Now, we can get into a lot of how. I prefer to focus on a North Star. Every American with access to affordable health care, because lack of access to health care, lack of an ability to pay copays, sometimes the difficulty of expensive acute care when one gets older and has more serious ailments is so much a driver of the disparities we face. So that would be number two. Number three, education. Early childhood education, K through 12 education, working to improve educational outcomes. And then fourth, access to wealth, home ownership, business ownership. It means access to money, access to capital. These are the kinds of policies that we need in this country. These policies would absolutely benefit Black Americans, but they would also benefit the substantial number of white Americans who find themselves with significant economic challenges. In many ways, and not in all ways, because African Americans have to deal with racial stereotypes and structural racial barriers. But in many respects, you find white Americans, many white Americans, many Black Americans in the same economic boat.
What are some of the implications in this kind of age when racial discrimination or anti-Semitism are increasingly normalized on social media?
We must remember that anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia are fruits of the same poisonous tree of hatred. And it makes the daily life of people who are victimized by that much more difficult and much more challenging. You can't go out without feeling you may be disrespected because of your race, your religion, your creed, your gender identity. Then this country is not in a place where we want it to be. This country has been an experiment in pluralism from the very beginning. We have to get it right in the 21st century as a multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious democracy. That is what we are. We cannot stand as a nation if we don't embrace the idea that we're multi. If this is simply going to be a battle between various ethnic groups because, quote, we think like we're in a tribe. This nation cannot move forward. This nation can. So it is distressing to see anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, homophobia rise in the nation at this time, which is why we must vocally we must band together to fight it. We must affirm it as something bad and something un-American.
It is, without question, I agree 100%. Over here at the Holocaust Memorial, we have hundreds of students coming through the doors here every week from the various schools, talking about the types of hate that's still out there, that and the history of the genocides. It's not just the Holocaust. That since the Holocaust, some 40 to 50 million people have been killed in genocides. So hatred still exists. We have to eradicate it as best as we can, but it seems like an uphill battle many times because it kind of gets quiet, and then there's something that stirs it up, and it rears its ugly head, and we're dealing with that right now. So, we're trying to change some legislation. We're trying to educate, but also letting the young people understand and know that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on social media, that they have to be gatekeepers.
Let me say something. We have witnessed in this country efforts to diminish the horror and the very existence of the Holocaust. How can anyone be so naive, hateful, and misinformed to deny the existence less than 100 years ago of what happened in that period? By the very same token, now to eliminate references to slavery in the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., and within the Smithsonian properties. It's the same thing. Let's just deny the violence. Let's pretend it didn't exist. Let's say, well, it's too uncomfortable for people to speak about. Let's not talk about it. Next thing you'll know, we won't talk about the Civil War. We won't talk about the truth. In my family, I can trace my family back to the Whitney Plantation. I can trace my family back to Anna and Victor and Celeste, who were enslaved relatives. Grandmother was enslaved until the Emancipation Proclamation. We cannot allow deniers of the Holocaust, deniers of slavery, deniers of these horrific incidents, these horrific genocidal incidents. We cannot allow the history to be erased, wiped out, tortured, or washed over. And this is one of the fights and the battles I never thought we'd be having in 2025.
And you're right. The Jewish people in this country have supported all the protests that that occurred going back 50, 60, 70 years. Many Jews actually participated in some of these marches, right, with Martin Luther King, and because we understand, and we're with you.
I let people know in my own world and in my own life. The first time I had an opportunity to swim in a pool, it was at the Jewish Community Center on St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans. And the reason why is my mother had built a friendship with a woman by the name of Bernice Leader. Bernice Leader was a New Yorker who moved to New Orleans because her husband was a professor in New Orleans, and were, activists together. And one day she told my mother, "I'm just taking your kids." And my mother's like, "Well, we can't go." She says, "We're going." And we walked in, and we were in the pool like nothing was said about it. And she was the type of woman who dared anybody question her and dared anybody to challenge her. I say that because this historic relationship between the Jewish communities and the Black communities has to be understood in a dynamic that's not just about New York, but is also about cities in the South. The Jacksons, the New Orleans, the Memphises, the Atlantas, the Baton Rouges, the Birmingham, where the Jewish communities and the Black communities had a relationship in those days. It wasn't a perfect relationship. It wasn't 100% symbiotic, but it was a working relationship with the cause of my parents were involved in the National Conference of Christians and Jews. My parents were honored. I later was honored by the ADL chapter in New Orleans with their Torch of Liberty Award. I mean, it's important. We are living in a time where we have not done a good job educating our children about civics, government, the Constitution, and the history of the 20th century. World War II and the Holocaust, the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, and understanding you can't try to wash over these historic incidents and come up with a bogus interpretation of what occurred. We cannot allow that to happen.
You spent a lengthy time as mayor of New Orleans. What kind of lessons did you take from that job to your current position with the National Urban League?
I think you've got to work really hard on issues of justice and fairness. You have to be explicit about it. And you also have to work every day to build bridges of cooperation. And to build bridges and cooperation doesn't mean you have to be weak or less than an advocate for the things you believe in. American cities, New Orleans, like any other city, it's by definition a very diverse place of people from all kinds of backgrounds. New York is that way, Boston's that way, Atlanta's that way, Houston's that way. The American city is the laboratory for the future. So I learned, very early on in my work that I tried when I could to coalition build, and a very important effort to do it. It was not always successful, but it was part of my operating style to try to bring people to the community. But I was a patient but impatient person. If I try to build a bridge, try to work through something, and I felt like people were obstructing or getting in the way, I would be very decisive in making a decision. But I always wanted to try to build bridges.
It's 2025 now. Is Martin Luther King's dream closer or farther away than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago?
One thing is it is still relevant today because Martin Luther King's vision is a vision for the ages. It was an enduring vision. Martin Luther King is, we had the founding fathers, then we had the new founding fathers. And Martin Luther King is one of those new founding fathers to redeem America, but create a vision for the future of America. That vision is still very real today. That vision will win out in the end. But like it was challenged in the 60s, it's being challenged today. We have to stand that vision, that the Constitution, that the nation's religious traditions, the nation's cultural traditions support the idea of an inclusive, diverse American. We must, embrace that. His dream, his vision will be challenged and attacked. But there are those like us who are passionate about that vision and who will work every day to make it real.
I'm afraid our time has run out, but thank you for tuning in to this episode of Disrupting Hate on hmTV. Many thanks to our guest, Marc Morial, for sharing his insights, and to my co-host, Bernie Furshpan. Be sure to subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care and be well.